There are moments in a man's life when the ground shifts beneath him, not because of a gun pressed to his temple, not because of a deal gone wrong or an empire on the verge of collapse, but because of a woman carrying a tray of drinks through a crowded restaurant on a Tuesday night. Igor Melnikov had survived wars that most men could not name. He had sat across negotiating tables with men who would have liked nothing more than to see him buried. He had built something from nothing, clawed his way through the cold architecture of a world that rewarded only the ruthless. And yet, on that particular Tuesday, in the amber-lit dining room of Sorel, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, the thing that stopped him cold was a waitress. Her name, he didn't know yet. But he noticed her the way you notice a storm before it arrives, instinctively, and with a strange pull in the chest that doesn't come with a warning. She moved through the room like she owned the floor without realizing it. There was a confidence in her stride that wasn't performative, it was structural, bone deep, the kind that comes not from privilege but from years of learning how to stand your ground. She was tall and brown-skinned, with close-cropped natural hair and eyes that swept the room quickly, efficiently, reading tables the way a chess player reads a board. Her uniform, white shirt, black apron, did nothing to diminish her. Igor sat in the private booth in the back corner of Sorel, which had been reserved for him permanently for the last 4 years. His associate, Dmitri, was talking about something that required his attention. Igor was not listening. He watched the waitress move to a table of 4 near the window. He watched her smile, not the wide, eager smile of someone desperate to be liked, but the quiet, steady smile of someone who had decided to be professional and meant it. She spoke. The table laughed. She moved on. Igor picked up his glass of mineral water and drank slowly, saying nothing. Igor. Dmitri's voice broke through the surface. I heard you, Igor said, though he hadn't. He turned his eyes from the woman and back to the man across from him. The warehouse on Vance. We moved the timeline. 2 weeks. Dmitri nodded, satisfied. The meeting moved forward. But 3 times more that night, against his own discipline, Igor's gaze drifted back to her. He told himself it was nothing. The mind wandered sometimes, even his. He told himself this with the same calm certainty he told himself many things. He did not entirely believe it. Her name was Taran. He learned this not that night, but the following Thursday, when he returned to Sorel not for a meeting but for dinner, alone, which was unusual enough that even Dmitri raised an eyebrow when told. He sat at his regular booth, ordered his usual, and waited. She was there again. Working the floor on the far side of the room. He flagged down the host, asked the name of the waitress in the section near the bar. The host, well practiced in discretion where Igor was concerned, answered without flinching, Taran. Igor repeated the name once in his mind, quietly, as though testing its weight. She came to his table that night because a colleague was running behind and the floor manager asked her to cover. She arrived at the booth with the same measured composure she brought to every table, a small notepad in hand, her expression professional and unhurried. She recognized him, he could see it in the slight recalibration of her posture, the momentary adjustment people made when they realized who he was. Most people overcorrected, became fawning or stiff. She did neither. Good evening, she said. Can I get you started with something, or are you waiting on someone? Just me, Igor said. Then take your time. She didn't smile artificially. She simply stood ready, unhurried, giving him the space to decide without the performance of eagerness. He ordered. She left. She returned with his food and refilled his water twice without being asked, and at the end of the meal she brought the check and said, "Have a good night," and that was that. Clean, direct, without theater. He left a tip that was larger than the bill itself, which he did not do as a gesture of flirtation, it was simply what he thought the service was worth. When he stepped out into the night air, he paused on the sidewalk for exactly 3 seconds. He came back the following Tuesday. Over the next 3 weeks, he came to Sorel 6 times. Never on the same days. Always alone or with a single associate who was instructed not to speak unnecessarily. He sat in his booth and he watched the room, as he always did, because situational awareness was the habit of a lifetime, but increasingly, the room was less interesting than she was. He studied Taran the way he studied things that mattered. He noticed how she diffused a difficult customer with a joke that wasn't quite a joke. He noticed how she never looked at her phone between tables. He noticed that she stayed 20 minutes after her section closed to help a newer colleague who was drowning on a busy Friday. He noticed that she kept a book in her apron pocket. He couldn't see the title, but the spine was cracked from use. On her birthday, a detail he had not sought deliberately, but which had reached him through the quiet network of information that surrounded him always, like air, the kitchen brought out a small dessert to her from the staff. She laughed and shook her head and ate half of it standing up at the service counter. It was a real laugh. He hadn't heard it clearly from across the room, but he could see it in the way her whole face changed. He was not a man given to sentiment. He recognized this about himself without apology. But something about Taran worked on him the way water worked on stone, not violently, not dramatically, but with the patient insistence of something that simply knew where it was going. He told himself, I am observing. Gathering information. This is what I do. He told himself, she is interesting. That is all. On a Thursday in November, 16 minutes past 10 at night, Igor was finishing a phone call in the back of his car outside Sorrel when he saw her come out through the staff entrance on the side of the building. She was wearing a gray coat now, her apron gone, a canvas bag over one shoulder and the book from her apron tucked under her arm. She paused at the corner, checked her phone, frowned at something she read, and then began walking north. Not toward a cab, not toward a rideshare pickup. Walking. It was cold. It was late. The neighborhood at that hour was not entirely kind. Igor made a decision in the space of a breath. Follow at distance, he told his driver. The car moved slowly, half a block behind her, headlights dim. She walked quickly but not anxiously, with the rhythmic purpose of someone who did this often. She turned left on Aldine, right on Crestwood, then down a narrower street lined with older apartment buildings and corner stores that had long since closed. After 11 minutes of walking, she stopped in front of a building on Pelman Street, 5 stories, brick facade, fire escape running down the front, and before going inside, she paused on the step and turned, as though she had heard something, or felt something. She looked back down the street. Her eyes passed over the car without settling on it. Then she went inside. Igor sat in the dark car for a long moment. Take me home, he said. But on the drive home he was quiet in a way his driver, a man named Yuri who had been with him for 11 years, recognized as thinking. Not strategizing. Not planning. Just thinking. The next morning, the report came in. He had not asked for it. He would not have asked for it. But the men around him had learned, over the years, that when Igor Melnikov showed particular interest in something or someone, information was useful to have. The report landed on his desk in a sealed envelope, and he almost left it there. He opened it instead. Taran Elise Beaumont. 29 years old. Born in Atlanta, raised in Baltimore, moved to this city 6 years ago. 2 years of community college, interrupted. Currently employed at Sorrel for the past 14 months. Also working weekend mornings at a laundromat on Crestwood Avenue. Evening classes 3 nights a week at the community college, she'd gone back. Business administration. The building on Pelman Street, she lived on the 4th floor. Unit 4C. The apartment was registered in her name. Below the apartment, on the 2nd floor, was a unit registered to a woman named Delia Beaumont, 61, her mother. Retired. Limited income. Medical expenses. The kind of medical expenses that don't stop coming. Igor set the report down and stood at his window for a long time, looking at the city below. He understood, then, the 2 jobs and the night classes. He understood the quick walk home instead of a cab. He understood the way she moved, with no wasted motion, no energy spent on performance, because there was no room in her life for waste. She was holding everything up with both hands and she was doing it quietly, without asking the room to notice. He went to Sorrel that evening. She was at his table within minutes, as had become the loose pattern of things. He ordered. She began to leave. He said, Taran. She paused. Turned back. Her expression was composed, but her eyes shifted slightly, a small recalibration. Yes? Sit down for a moment. A beat. I'm working. I know. I'll speak with Marchand. That was the floor manager. She knew he and Marchand had an understanding. Another beat. Something crossed her face, not fear, exactly. More like the quiet assessment of someone deciding how much ground to give. She sat across from him. She kept her posture straight and her hands folded on the table and her eyes on him with a directness that most people, in his presence, could not maintain. You've been coming here a lot, she said. It was not a question. I have. Why are you telling me to sit down? He studied her for a moment. He had many ways of beginning a conversation, and most of them involved a kind of calibrated authority, the practiced ease of a man who expected the room to arrange itself around his needs. He found, looking at her, that none of those felt right. Because I've been watching you work for 3 weeks, he said, and I'd rather talk to you. She didn't react with flattery or alarm. She simply said, okay. So talk. He almost smiled. You're direct. You asked me to sit down at your table on a Thursday night when I have 4 other tables, she said. Directness feels appropriate. This time he did smile, small, controlled, but real. You're going back to school, he said. A stillness came over her. Not the stillness of surprise, but the stillness of someone recalibrating how much this man already knew. Business administration, she said carefully. How long? I have 2 semesters left. Maybe 3, depending on. She stopped. Why are you asking me this? Because I'm curious about you. Most men who are curious about me don't know what classes I'm taking, she said. The edge in her voice was clean, not hostile, just clear. A boundary being drawn without drama. He accepted it. That was wrong of me to know, he said. I won't pretend otherwise. She looked at him for a moment. That steadiness again, that refusal to look away. Who are you, actually, she said. I know your name. I know what people say. But who are you? It was not the question he expected. He considered it honestly. A man who has made a great many difficult choices, he said. And who is, at this moment, sitting across from a woman he finds completely unexpected. Something shifted in her expression, not softening, exactly. More like an adjustment, the way someone adjusts when they realize the terrain is different from what the map suggested. I need to get back to my tables, she said. I know. She stood. Paused. Tomorrow is my day off, she said, as though it were a fact she was sharing about the weather. Then she walked back to the floor. Igor watched her go. He was at the cafe on Reinhardt Street the next morning at 9, which was where he had a standing habit of taking breakfast when the city felt manageable. He did not know if she knew this. He ordered coffee and read the financial news and waited. He was not a man who waited for things, as a rule. He told himself this was different because it was entirely possible she wouldn't come. That she had said it simply as information, not invitation. She came at 9:43. She was wearing dark jeans and a cream-colored turtleneck and her natural hair was out fully now, round and full and beautiful, and she came through the door and scanned the room and found him with her eyes and walked over with the same unhurried purposefulness he had watched for weeks from across a restaurant floor. She sat down. I walked past twice before I came in, she said. I know. I saw you from the window. She looked at him. Then she laughed, once, short, surprised. The real laugh. He felt it settle somewhere in his chest. You're incredibly strange, she said. Yes, he agreed. They talked for 2 hours. He could not have told you, after, what the shape of the conversation was exactly, only that it moved between things with a naturalness that surprised him. She talked about Baltimore, about the particular exhaustion of growing up in a house where money was always the background noise of every decision. She talked about her mother with love and with a careful kind of grief, not for a death, but for a life worn down by time and illness and hard years. She did not ask for sympathy. She stated these things the way she stated everything, clearly, without embellishment, as fact. He told her things too, not the operational things, not the darkness at the center of his world, but other things. That he had come to this country at 22 with nothing but a contact number and a suitcase. That there was a version of himself he had left behind somewhere east of the Ural Mountains that he sometimes thought about. That he had never, in his adult life, sat in a cafe and talked to someone for 2 hours without an agenda. And now, she asked. Now I have a different kind of agenda, he said. He looked at her steadily. I want you to know who I am. The full picture. I already have some idea of the full picture, she said. I'm not naive, Igor. No, he said. You are the least naive person I've met. She looked out the window. The street was bright and cold, people moving past in coats and scarves. This is going to be complicated, she said. Everything worthwhile is. She turned back to him. That look again, direct, assessing, real. I'm not someone you can manage, she said. I'm not someone you can keep in a box or make decisions for or protect by keeping in the dark. If you want to know me, you know all of me. And that means I know all of you. Or at least as much as you're capable of telling. He considered this. He had never, in his life, agreed to this kind of terms with anyone. He said, all right. All right, she repeated, as though testing the weight of his word. They left the cafe together and walked 3 blocks in the cold without touching, talking about nothing in particular, and when they reached the corner where their paths diverged she said goodbye and walked away and he stood at that corner in the November wind and felt, for perhaps the first time in a decade, like something in the future was possible that hadn't been possible before. He did not rush it. That was not a strategy, it was simply how it felt. He took her to dinner the following week, not at Sorrel, but at a quieter place uptown. A Georgian restaurant with no cameras and a table in the back corner and a proprietor who understood discretion. They ate slowly. She tried the khinkali and got the broth down her chin and didn't seem remotely embarrassed, just laughed and reached for a napkin. He watched her laugh and something tightened in his chest that he had no clean word for. She asked him about the Bratva. Not in the wide-eyed way of someone thrilled by danger, not in the calculated way of someone collecting information, but in the careful way of someone who understood that to know a person you had to know the shape of the life they lived. He answered honestly, in the general strokes, in the true emotional textures, without the operational details that would have made her unsafe. He told her that power in his world was less about violence than most people imagined, and more about the management of loyalty, debt, and fear. He told her that the violence, when it came, was not glamorous. She listened without flinching, without romanticizing. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Do you want out? She asked. It's not a door you open from the inside, he said. She nodded, slow. Then who's protecting who, in this? He looked at her for a long time. I don't know yet, he said, which was the most honest thing he'd said in years. 6 weeks after the Tuesday night he'd first noticed her, he kissed her for the first time, outside her building on Pelman Street, in the cold, after he had walked her home because she had let him. It was quiet and unhurried, and when it ended she kept her eyes closed for a moment before opening them, and he felt the city rearrange itself slightly around that moment, as though the geography had shifted by some small and permanent degree. Okay, she said softly, and that was all. She said it like she meant it. Like a door being opened. The threat came in January, with the cold. Igor had known, in the abstract, that being seen with someone meant that someone became legible, visible in the world in a new way, refracted through his associations. He had been careful. He had been more careful than he had been about anything in recent memory. But careful was not the same as invisible, and in his world, nothing was truly invisible forever. It came first as a message, a photograph delivered to one of his associates, a photo of Taran leaving her building at 7 in the morning, taken from across the street with a long lens. No text. No threat stated. Just the image, and a name he recognized, Varnan. Artem Varnan. A man from the old country whose relationship with Igor was a long and tangled thing of debts and old grievances, a man who had been looking for leverage for 2 years now without finding it. Igor sat in his office and looked at the photograph for a very long time. The thing he felt was not fear. He was not, in the conventional sense, afraid for himself. What he felt was colder and more specific than fear. It was the terrible clarity of understanding that something he valued was now in the frame. That by wanting Taran, by letting her become visible in his life, he had created an exposure that his enemies could read. He called his security chief, a quiet man named Breslin, and gave him instructions without raising his voice. He called Dmitri and spoke for 4 minutes. He made 2 other calls that were brief and direct. He did all of this before he called Taran, because when he called Taran, he wanted to be able to tell her what was happening and what was being done about it, not call her in the middle of uncertainty. She answered on the second ring. "Hey. I need to tell you something," he said. "I need you to not panic." A pause. That is an opening sentence designed to make a person panic. "I know. I'm sorry," he told her. All of it, who Varnan was, what the photograph meant, what it indicated about his intentions. He did not soften it or minimize it. She had told him she didn't want to be kept in the dark, and he had said all right, and that was a promise he intended to keep even when keeping it was hard. She was quiet for longer than he expected. "Taran. I'm here," she said. "I'm just thinking. There will be security on your building from tonight. I'd like you to stay in the city, close to places I know. I need Igor." Her voice was steady. Not cold, but grounded. The way she was when she was about to say something true. "I need you to hear me right now. If you make decisions for me to protect me, without me, that is the same as putting me in that box I told you about. Even if your reason is safety." He closed his eyes briefly. "I understand. Tell me what you need. Ask me. Don't arrange my life around me." He breathed. "I need you to accept security on your building. I need you to tell me if anything feels wrong, a car you don't recognize, someone watching. And I need you not to walk home alone at night until this is resolved." A pause. "That I can do," she said. "What are you going to do about Varnan?" "I'm going to remind him," Igor said quietly, "that leverage requires certainty. And he is not certain of enough." She accepted this. She did not love it, he could hear the tension in her silence, but she accepted it. "My mother," she said then. "She's in the building." "I know. She's included in what I've arranged." Another silence. "Okay," she said. The word she used for things she was letting herself trust. He did not sleep well that night. He lay in his apartment, which was large and quiet and had the kind of silence that only expensive real estate can manufacture, and he thought about Taran 4 miles away in her building on Pelman Street, in an apartment she paid for herself, caring for a mother who needed her, going to school 3 nights a week to build a future with her own hands. He thought about what it meant that he had brought this into her orbit. He thought about the photograph, the long-lens photograph of her walking out her door in the morning, going about her life, unaware of the frame she was inside. The cold rage he felt was quiet and deep, and he did not let it make his thinking sloppy. The resolution with Varnan took 12 days. It was not violent, not in the way that would have made a story out of it. It was the quieter, more effective kind of resolution, a series of conversations that reminded Artem Varnan of the specific nature of his own vulnerabilities, of the debts that existed between them and who held the longer end of those debts. A message, understood clearly. An understanding reached in the gray and unglamorous way that most things in Igor's world were actually reached, not in climactic confrontations, but in the careful, pressured language of men who understood consequence. The photograph was the last communication received from Varnan's direction. Igor told Taran on a Thursday evening when she came to his apartment for the first time. He had cooked, badly, he would admit, though the lamb eventually came out passable, and they ate at his kitchen table rather than the dining room because the dining room felt formal in a way that the moment didn't need. She walked around his apartment with the book she'd brought tucked under her arm, looking at things with quiet, honest curiosity, touching nothing, asking questions about one or two things on the shelves. He watched her move through his space and felt something settle in him that had been restless for weeks. "It's over," she said, when he told her. "He won't move on this again," Igor said. She turned a small framed photograph over in her hands. Not his, just a piece he'd had on a shelf for years. "You're sure?" "Yes." She set the photograph down and looked at him. Her expression was complicated, relief and something behind it, something she was working through. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "When you saw that photograph of me, when you knew he was watching me, what did you feel?" He considered the honest answer. "Something I haven't felt in a long time," he said. "Which was that there was something I was not willing to lose." She held his gaze for a moment. "That's very honest. You asked me to be." She crossed the kitchen and stood in front of him and put her hand flat against his chest, not romantically, not in that sweeping dramatic gesture, just a steady, warm, real pressure, the way you'd press your palm to a wall to check if it was solid. He stayed very still. "You followed me that night," she said. "After work." "I know it was you, I figured it out a while ago. The car that was half a block back." She looked up at him. "You want to tell me why?" He had thought about this. He had the explanation prepared, instinct, security habit, something vague and true. He gave her none of those things. He gave her the actual truth instead. "Because you walked out into the cold and I couldn't make myself stop watching," he said. "I needed to know you got home safely. You could have offered me a cab. I didn't have that right yet." She was quiet for a moment, her hand still against his chest. "And now," she said. "Now I'm asking," he said. "Whatever comes next, I'm asking." She tilted her head slightly, that careful consideration that was so fully, entirely her. "My mother wants to meet you," she said. "She says anyone who worries about her daughter getting home safe is someone she's willing to look at." He felt something shift in the room. Not the world rearranging itself, just something interior, some internal architecture that had been built for one person rearranging quietly to include a second. "When?" he said. "Sunday," she said. "She makes gumbo. It takes 4 hours and she'll tell you exactly how it's done whether you ask or not." "I'll be there," he said. She smiled then, the real one, the whole face one he had seen from across the restaurant floor 100 times and never once gotten tired of. "You know," she said, "I still remember the first time you came to my section. I thought, this man is a lot. Too much, probably. That's a reasonable assessment. But then you tipped like a person who thought I was worth something," she said. "Not like a person trying to buy something. Just like someone who thought the work I did had value. And I thought about that for a while." He looked at her. "You're worth considerably more than what I left." She laughed, and he felt it, the way he always felt it, that settling in the chest, that thing he had no clean word for but which he had stopped pretending wasn't there. "Come on," she said, pulling back slightly, turning toward the table. "The lamb is going to get cold and you worked hard on it." "I'm not sure hard is the right word. Long might be more accurate. Either way, we're eating it." He sat down across from her and they ate the lamb, which was passable, and she told him about a moment in her business class that week that had made her see something clearly about pricing structures, and he listened with the full attention he gave to things that mattered. And outside the window the city moved in its cold and indifferent way, and inside that kitchen there was warmth and food and a woman who had refused to make herself small or invisible and a man who had spent years building walls, discovering, slowly, that she had never been asking him to take them down, only to leave a door in one of them. Sunday came gray and cold. He brought a bottle of wine and, after a moment of internal debate, flowers, not an extravagant arrangement, just something honest and warm, the kind you buy because you want to, not because you're performing generosity. Taran let him in, took the flowers with a smile that told him the flowers were the right call, and led him down the short hallway of her apartment and through the interior door that connected to her mother's unit, a thing he hadn't known existed, that invisible door between their homes, that practical love built into the architecture. Delia Beaumont was 61 years old, small and upright and sharp-eyed in a way that reminded him powerfully, for a disorienting second, of his own grandmother. She was in the kitchen when they came in, a wooden spoon in her hand, and she turned and looked at Igor Melnikov with the frank, unhurried assessment of a woman who had spent 61 years figuring out who people were. "You're tall," she said. "Yes," he said. "You hungry?" "Very much." She turned back to the stove. "Sit down then." Taran caught his eye from across the room, and her expression was a map of quiet laughter held carefully in check. He sat down at the kitchen table and folded his hands and let the warmth of the room come over him, the smell of the gumbo, the sound of something low playing from an old radio on the counter, the particular texture of a home that was small and crowded with things that had been kept and mattered. He felt, for a second, very far from everything he was. Then he felt, for a second after that, more like himself than he had felt in years. The two feelings sat side by side in him without contradiction. Delia told him how the gumbo was made, as promised, beginning with the roux and the patience it required and the things most people got wrong. He listened with complete attention and asked genuine questions. She glanced at him once or twice with recalibrated eyes, the way people do when they've made a preliminary judgment and are finding it needs adjustment. After they ate, Delia was direct. "My daughter," she said, looking at him over the table, "has been holding this family up since she was 23 years old. She doesn't ask anyone for anything, which is both her greatest quality and the thing that worries me most about her." She paused. "You understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. And then she picked up her spoon and went back to her bowl, and the subject was considered closed. Taran walked him out an hour later, down to the street, and they stood in the cold for a moment. He could see in her face something open and present that hadn't been there 3 months ago, or rather, something that had been there but had been careful. Held at a distance. "She likes you," Taran said. "She's reserving judgment. For her, that's the same thing." He looked at her. The city was quiet around them, the kind of Sunday evening quiet that felt like permission for honesty. "I keep thinking," he said, "about the night I followed you." She tilted her head slightly. "I told myself I was being cautious," he said. "Protective. Staying back, not involving myself, just making sure you were safe." He looked down the street and then back at her. "I think the truth is simpler than that. I saw you walk out into the cold and I wasn't ready to stop knowing where you were." She was quiet for a moment. "You could have just talked to me," she said gently. "I know. I'm not," he paused. "In my world, when I want something, the habit is to observe first. Understand the shape of it. Calculate the risk. I didn't know another way. And now?" He looked at her. "Now I'm talking to you," he said. "And asking. And standing on the street in the cold, which I don't think I've done voluntarily in about 10 years. She laughed softly. "You're doing fine," she said. He reached out and took her hand. "Not dramatically. Just the way you hold something you've decided you don't want to let go of," and she let him, and they stood there for a moment in the cold, in the quiet, in the city, which went on around them without requiring them to be anything other than what they were. He walked home that night. 3 miles, in the cold, which was unusual for him. He walked with his hands in his pockets and the city coming at him with its noise and light and indifference, and he thought about all the small, specific things that had built themselves into something. A woman moving across a restaurant floor with a tray of drinks, the particular way she held her posture, the night he had sat in a dark car watching her door close. He thought about the photograph that had been meant as a threat, and what it had actually done, not frightened him into distance, but shown him in sharp relief exactly what he was not willing to give up. He thought about Sunday gumbo and a woman who told you how the roux was made and meant it as a kind of blessing. He thought about Taran saying okay in the quiet after a kiss, in the way she said it to mean, "I trust this. I'm letting this be real." He had spent his adult life making decisions in the dark, building things from materials that most people never touched, navigating a world that rewarded hardness and punished vulnerability. He was not naive about what he was or what his life looked like from the outside. He was not going to be, in some simple redemptive arc, a different person than the one he had become. But he understood, walking through the cold city on that Sunday night, that the question was never whether a person could be entirely different, it was whether, beside the right person, they could find the version of themselves that was truer than the armor. Taran had not asked him to become someone else. She had asked him to be real with her. The distinction was everything. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday night, the same night he had first noticed her, in a symmetry that he mentioned to her once and she found either significant or amusing, he couldn't quite tell, she came by his apartment again, and he had cooked again, better this time. And they ate and talked, and later she fell asleep on his couch reading her book while he finished some work at his desk, and he looked over at her and the lamp made a warm shape of light and shadow over her, and he thought, this is what followed. This is what changed everything. Not an event. Not a revelation. Not a dramatic reversal. Just this, a man who had organized his whole life around not being seen, sitting in a room with someone who had insisted, quietly and without drama, on seeing him anyway. He turned off his desk lamp, pulled a blanket over her, and went to stand at the window. The city below moved in its cold, indifferent way, as it always did. He felt, for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, entirely at peace with the view. Hi, my loves. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. I want you to know that this story sat in me for a while before I was ready to write it. There's something about Taran that kept pulling at me, this woman who is exhausted and working herself to the bone and still manages to hold her head up straight and look people in the eye and demand to be seen clearly. I think I wanted to write her because I know women like her. I think a lot of you do too. Women who hold everything up and ask for nothing and deserve someone who notices, not just from across a room, but really notices. The full picture. And Igor, complicated, guarded, used to a world where care is a liability, I wanted to show him not as a fantasy of power but as a man who is genuinely unsettled by something for the first time in years. Because I think that's actually the romantic part. Not the wealth or the danger or the grand gestures. The moment when someone who has built walls doesn't tear them down dramatically but just, quietly, puts a door in one of them, because someone specific asked him to. The scene that I loved the most writing was that Sunday in Delia's kitchen. There's something about being brought into someone's family kitchen, sitting at a small table with someone's mother who tells you exactly how the gumbo is made, that felt like the truest kind of love story to me. More than any kiss or confession. That ordinary, warm, witnessed moment. I hope this story gave you something. A feeling of being seen, maybe. Or just the pleasant warmth of watching two good people find their way to each other, slowly and imperfectly and honestly. If you felt something today, leave a comment. I read every single one. And if you're watching this late at night, wrapped in something warm, hi. I'm glad you're here. Until next time, take care of yourselves. With so much love.